I didn't think I'd be doing another off the book segment so soon, but 'tis the season, right? So let's get into some of the favorite scary movies that I've watched over my many, many years. Hey, what's up, bookworms and horror fanatics? Mike back with a new Off the Books segment, where today we're going to be talking about my 10 favorite horror films of all time. And I just want to say that I know that this list won't be for everyone because I am 42 years old. I am one of those people who think that the horror that's going to leave the biggest imprint on you is the stuff you watched when you were younger, when horror was still scary. So if you're looking for stuff that's come out probably in the last 5 years, you're not going to find it here. So again, I want everybody to remember that this list is an opinion. This is just for me, my 10 favorite. So I hope you'll drop in the comments below and let me know, your favorite horror movies. There are no wrong answers in a category like this. So instead of just telling me how much mine suck, maybe you can drop in there and let me know your favorite. So before I get going, I kind of want to go through some of my tough cuts. I'm not really going to be doing a honorable mention or anything like that. So I'm just going to kind of hold up some of my tougher cuts, even though some of these I consider to be all-time classics. It's just stuff I didn't have room for on this list. And anytime you commit yourself to doing a list like this, you're going to have some stuff that you say, hey, that's a great movie, but would I consider it in my top 10? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know how well you guys can even see some of this stuff, or some of this stuff you might look at and you'd be like, hey, do I really consider that horror? And also, something that I want to do on this list is I want to only count movies I think have aged well, because a big part of this is nostalgia. Now, to me, I will never let nostalgia be a reason why I put something on here. I can look at movies I liked when I was a kid and say, yeah, I still like them, but I can admit they haven't aged well. They're not good movies. Like, I know everybody I know loves that movie, The Wizard, which was basically just a commercial for Nintendo, and it's aged horribly. And I can say, yeah, I loved it when I was 11. I watch it now, and it's terrible. I'm not that kind of nostalgia freak to where I'm going to let that dictate if I'm going to put something on my favorites list. So that, not that all these kind of fall in there, it's just some that I just didn't have room for, and I couldn't justify getting them onto this list here, and that will kind of wrap it up. Then you have other ones, and it's symbolic when I hold this one up, is that I feel like the franchise kind of got bogged down by sequels and stuff like that. But let's get into it with my top 10 now. Up first, it might be one that people might not consider what they would think of when they go to horror, because they're thinking either something supernatural or some kind of serial killer or something like that. Well, this is a serial killer movie, and this is 1986's Henry, A Portrait of a Serial Killer. Now, I remember the first time I saw this movie. First up, I was absolutely floored by Michael Rooker in this movie. I had seen him in other things. I think the only thing I'd seen him in when I saw this movie for the first time was Mallrats. That is obviously, most people probably know him from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. But his performance in this is just absolutely mesmerizing. But other things in there, I think it's scary because it's real. It's based off of a very real person. So when you get into that, obviously that's going to add to it. But I think that there's this one scene where they're just, him and Otis are just attacking this entire family. And there's like nothing this family can do. And that was just, I watched that for the first time when I had like a newborn kid. And I just absolutely freaked me out. It made my wife get up and leave. She got up and left during that part. She'll watch scary stuff with me during Halloween. That was one where she couldn't even finish. She just went ahead and left. And I think that kind of speaks to just how freaky that movie really is. Number 9, this is 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now this is one I think that modern audiences will watch, or younger modern audiences will watch and be like, that is absolutely cornball. I can't understand why you guys like that. Here's the thing. Pre-internet, folks believed that this was real. This was like Blair Witch before Blair Witch. Everybody thought that this actually happened. And I think that's what kind of freaked them out a little bit, especially living out here in Texas. Yes, it is based loosely off of a serial killer, but it's very much just embellishes everything about it. Ed Gein, I believe, is his name, but you said, use people's skin to make masks and furniture and things like that. And that's in there. But I think when I say that people say that movie's kind of cheesy or whatever, I think that the low budget makes it more visceral, makes it more scary. There are very many disturbing images in that movie. And the shock value is just cranked to 11 because of just how realistic it looks. And then you got, of course, a iconic horror villain out of it in Leatherface. And you will never, ever look at chainsaws ever again. Number 8, another one I haven't upgraded. I lent my DVD out to somebody And they never returned it. And I said, that's okay. I'm just going to get it on Blu-ray, and I never have. And that's 1982. 1982's Poltergeist. Now, I think that this was a good mix of Amblin and horror. It's what it kind of felt like to me. Kind of like that same formula that Stranger Things uses, where it kind of feels like you could say, hey, this is Stephen King, or if this was like Stephen King and Steven Spielberg kind of teamed up. That's kind of how it felt. And that movie has some legitimate creep outs in it. You know what I'm talking about. You know I'm talking about the clown. You know I'm talking about the tree outside the window. Basically, this movie played into every single fear I had as a kid. And can you believe this movie's only rated PG? I saw it on Netflix the other night, and I was like, PG, I wonder if my kid... No, I'm not going to give my kid those nightmares. I think that's because it was before we had PG-13, so it was either PG or R, and, back then the directors would sweet-talk the studio to get it down to a PG, so, more people would go see it. But, terrifying movie, seeing it as a young man, and I'm surprised at how well it's aged. Just a fantastic cast, and just some all-time frights for a movie. Number 7... the night that he came home, it actually happens to be my birth year, 1978. This, of course, is Halloween, the original Halloween. This one, I'm not going to take any points away from the awful sequels. I'm one of those who don't think that the new movie that they put out like a couple years ago was that great. To me, it never will touch the original. I think, again, being low budget. I mean, John Carpenter shot this movie basically... for what the new Halloween movie probably paid for catering. That's how cheap this movie was. And it looks like it was like mostly shot through handhelds. At the time it came out, it was the most successful independent horror film of all time. I think Blair Witch is actually what knocked it off, which is wild. But this movie was a revelation. And I think it was the first real slasher film, just whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And the soundtrack by John Carpenter just really kind of set the expectations for every soundtrack for every movie he did after that, which is usually pretty good. But this really put John Carpenter on the map. And I think the first time I saw that, it really creeped me out to where you ever thought someone was following you, and it made me look at Don't Fear the Reaper in a much new way. It was Jamie Lee Curtis when she was still the Scream Queen. So I'm not going to talk too much about that new one, but the original one, absolutely classic, and I still love it to death. You want to talk about one where the sequels have really kind of drug it down? I'm talking about The Nightmare on Elm Street. 1984, the original, still absolutely terrifying even today. I think that there's so many things from it that still try to be used. Like we watched that Before I Wake movie that Mike Flanagan did the other night. I'm like, you know what? I bet he watched Nightmare on Elm Street the other night and he thought, hey, I have an idea, where he kind of had the events of the people that weren't having the dream were the ones being affected. But just the idea of you can't beat sleep. And once you go into sleep, you've got this crazy serial killer with a burned face and a killer claw that is really going to just jack with you. And it added the element of, in dreams, you don't have to be bound by reality. So all these crazy supernatural things can be happening in the dreams. And, I mean, Freddy, I think you think about 80s pop culture icons. I think Freddy's right there with Ronald Reagan, and like he's the most recognizable face from the 80s. Freddy was it. He led the charge. He was over Jason. He was over Michael Myers. He was over Pinhead. He was the man, and it's something that I think just is a testament to Robert Englund's greatness. They just kept bringing this guy back. So much I think he did an appearance in the Goldbergs. At the time I was like, he's too old, but I saw that and I was kind of like, you know what? I'd be on board if he wanted to put on the makeup and the claw one more time. I don't care if he's 80. But yeah, I think the Halloween costume I tried to do the most as a kid was Freddy Krueger, like all kids my age. But for me, just this first movie, just straight nightmare fuel. The Tina murder scene is still one of the most gruesome things ever shot on film, and it's tried to be replicated. I think about that 2010 was that they tried to do the remake, and they tried to just do that scene just shot by shot, and it just didn't work anymore. Again, a lot of these movies that had the lower budget, I think that actually helped them, using practical effects and keeping things more real. Number 5, first real classic here, 1973. My first horror movie that I ever watched, because I had a brother that was 6 years older than me, and when the parents were gone, we had HBO, and he let me stay up late with him, and we watched The Exorcist. Yes, I was 6 years old, guys. This is why my mind is so messed up now. 6 years old watching The Exorcist. Growing up in a very, very sheltered Pentecostal household, this was my first foray into the horror genre. Before I even read anything scary, I watched The Exorcist. And then when they released this version, I think they put it back in theaters in 2000, the version that you've never seen, and it made it even scarier with that freaking spider walk scene. But I think that the crucifix scene in here is obviously what stuck with me as a young man, and I was way too young to be watching something like that. I don't know what my brother was thinking. I mean, he was, almost 12, and he was sneaking Playboy and things like that by that age. Me, I was still like, hey, can I bring my G.I. Joes to watch this really scary movie? So that's where I kind of was in that time period. But yeah, it's a movie that I think's aged very well because of the practical effects. And I'll keep saying that. I know that people complain about all those Gen Xers that always talk about practical effects, but with the horror, it really, really made the difference. And this one is a perfect example of how. Okay, 1974. Now, some people will jump on this and say, oh, that isn't actually a horror movie. Well, it is to me, and I'm talking about 1975's Jaws. I don't know why you wouldn't put this in horror because, look, I suffer from something called thalassophobia. If you don't know what that is, it is fear of wide open spaces, especially the ocean. I am terrified of the ocean because maybe I've read too much Lovecraft, but there are big, scary things in the ocean that we don't even know about because we can't explore it, right? Because of the water pressure, whatever. Well, I think just about everyone was scared of being eaten, right? And so when you're talking about being eaten by a giant great white shark, yeah, I think that's going to it's going to scare just about anybody. I think the shark malfunctioning, if you watch the special features on this, the shark Bruce that they made for the movie that Spielberg made, the shark malfunctioning, I think, actually helped. Because the biggest thing with being horror is don't show the monster. You can have that sense of dread without actually knowing what's coming for you, and I think that actually can help things. And it helped a lot in that movie. I just think about the opening scene. Look, maybe it's because I'm terrified of the ocean, but anybody ever dreamt of being in like some dark water that you can't see through and just feeling something pull on you from underneath the water? It's absolutely pants shitting, right? So that opening scene of that movie sets the tone from go, and yes, I cannot think of very many things that are scarier than that. That movie scared the piss out of me, and to the point to where today, as a 42-year-old man, I still don't get in the ocean. So there's that. Let's move along here. 1980. I'm talking about The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. Yes, it's very, very different from the novel. Yes, it's also very good. It's a rare occasion where both versions of the story are very good. This is the ultimate tale of a descent into madness to where you don't even recognize yourself and you're actually going after your loved ones. It's absolutely terrifying. And I think I could not have been that old, probably not as young as The Exorcist, but not just necessarily the here's Johnny part that everybody remembers, but just him hacking at the door with the axe and just the screaming panic of having nowhere to go just absolutely terrified me as a young man. I watch it now as a big Stephen King guy, as a big horror guy, and I still kind of lock up at that scene, even knowing that I love the here's Johnny part. Who doesn't, right? But it's just, man, it's just some vicious stuff. That, again, the soundtrack is just terrific, and I think Kubrick, man, he just knew how to set the tone, right? I mean, the ambiance of that movie is just chilling. You got like that, almost like the strings that almost sound like 6 car horns being honked at the same time to actually make a pleasing sound. I think that the soundtrack to that really is the underrated thing about that movie. But just a spectacular movie on every level. But yeah, it's definitely one of the scariest things I think that has ever been put on film. And there's a reason that it has the lasting legacy it does. That there's so many people who enjoy it more than they enjoy Stephen King's book. Like I said, I look at them as different entities, and I think they're both just spectacular. And what I always say about stuff like that is, hey, you like the movie? Read the book and treat it like the director's cut. And then you had what Mike Flanagan made Dr. Sleep, which was actually a really good sequel to Stanley Kubrick's movie. It felt like a Kubrick movie, so that's about as high a praise as I can give something. But if you've watched this channel before, you guys know I love Mike Flanagan, even though he doesn't have anything on this list yet. Number 2, 1979, Alien. And that's a sexy cover. I love this box set. I felt like the series moved into action, obviously, after the original. But the 1979 original, I think it popularized the sci-fi horror genre. I don't know necessarily that it was the first, but I felt like it was the first to be like, hey, during a time of Star Wars and trying to bring back Star Trek and just everyone was trying to make space opera, it was the first one to come out and say, guys, space is fucking scary, right? And it wasn't just because of the alien. There was a lot of perils in space. It is not safe for human beings to be in a tin can floating out there in space in a hostile environment, obviously, right? But I think the whole fear of closed spaces. You know, he does so many like corridors and stuff in that movie where there's a big nasty coming at you, you got nowhere to go because you're in such a small, confined space. Where can you run to? But that was perfect. That was perfect. I mean, where can you go? You're in infinite nothing, basically. So that just kind of upped the tension, really. And I think that the tension combined with the whole race against the clock that there is in that, plus the paranoia of not knowing if this android's completely sane or not, just so many elements of that just ramp up the tension. And that is just a tense movie, and it lands all of the horror perfectly. So what's number one, are you going to ask? Well, it's Mr. Boogedy. Right now, it's not Mr. Boogedy. You guys remember Mr. Boogedy? It's on Disney Plus. Man, Disney has some really great horror movies, like Something Wicked This Way Comes. I wish Disney would put that on Disney Plus. I'm just rambling now, aren't I? Number one probably won't be a big surprise to anybody if you've heard me talk about practical effects. And that is 1982's The Thing by John Carpenter. Guys, I cannot explicitly state how much this movie has aged absolutely wonderfully. I talk about the practical effects. They are mortifying and they look so real. I mean, there are some things you're like, oh yeah, that definitely looks like me, but it looks awesome and it looks otherworldly, as it should when you're talking about this story. It's a movie that I think has been copied so many times. I think about the movie The Faculty, which was like, oh yeah, it's new age Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Like, yeah, but it's The Thing. It's just basically beat by beat. It's The Thing in a high school. It was very much a blatant copy, and I like it. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty good. But this movie here, man, I think this is the first proof that critics can get it wrong, because this movie was lambasted by critics when it came out. It was commercial failure. It gained cult status, and I think now it's beyond cult status. It's just considered one of the greatest horror stories of all time. And when I showed it to my wife for the first time, I was expecting to be like, okay, I'm afraid this hasn't aged very well. I got the Blu-ray and I was like, oh no, the Blu-ray might actually like, clean everything up to where everything looks kind of fake now. You know, that can kind of happen. Like we watched The Wizard of Oz on Blu-ray, you can see like the lines where the makeup and the wigs and stuff are put on. I was afraid that this was actually going to make the special effects look worse, but didn't. It looks great, man. And so many things about the cast is just magnetic, man. Kurt Russell. It was one of those things where I think the cast was so good that you really believed this whole paranoia and anybody can be the monster. It just played up to perfection. That cast was so good together, and that's why John Carpenter used several of those actors in numerous movies. But yeah, the practical effects make this one just hold up so well. And guys, that is my top 10 movies, or scary movies, or horror movies, or whatever you want to call them, of all time. Why do people get upset when you call them films? They're like, oh, it's not a film, it's a movie. Oh, it's not a movie, it's a film. What distinction makes it a film? Does it have to win an Academy Award to be called a film? Conversation for another time, I guess. But I'm interested to know what you guys' picks are. I know that the newest movie I have on here is, 1986? So, like I said, I think that when you're young and impressionable, that's when horror is going to have the longest lasting effect on you, and that's probably why it's like this. I've liked some new stuff. Like I said, Mike Flanagan I think is great. I like a lot of the movies that James Wan has made. A24 is kind of hit or miss with me. Blumhouse does mostly decent stuff, but nothing that I feel like I'm going to be watching this movie, 20, 25 years from now. I'm going to be passing this movie on to my kids like I do with these 10 here. So what are you guys? Drop in the comments and let me know, and I will talk to you there.